In 48 hours, Evelyn said gently as her lawyer placed a legal notice on my dining table. Everything your father built will legally belong to me. She sounded almost compassionate. If you didn't know her, you'd think she was trying to comfort a grieving daughter. Then she smiled. Small. Polite. Fake. Her attorney adjusted his tie and looked at me. Miss Dawson, litigation is expensive, especially for someone who wasn't left anything. We'd rather resolve this quietly. I didn't even look at the papers. The Army taught me that every battle is won long before the first shot is fired. You study your opponent, you wait, and when they finally make their move, you already know how it ends. I slid the legal notice back toward them. If you knew what my father signed 6 months before he died, I said calmly, you never would have walked into my house today. For the first time, Evelyn stopped smiling, only for a heartbeat. Then she laughed, picked up the papers, and walked away. The sharp click of her heels echoed through the hallway before the front door slammed shut. She thought she'd just declared war. She had no idea the battlefield had been chosen years ago. I'm Emily Dawson. Looking back now, I realize this fight didn't begin the day my father died. It began the day he introduced me to Evelyn. She was beautiful, charming, and nearly 25 years younger than him. She remembered birthdays, thanked waiters by name, and somehow made everyone feel special. Dad looked happier than I'd seen him in years. I wanted to be happy for him, until one moment changed everything. Dad stepped outside to answer a phone call, leaving a folder on the dining room table. Across the cover were 2 words. Estate planning. Evelyn glanced toward the hallway, made sure no one was watching, then quietly opened the folder. She stopped blinking. Seconds later, she slipped every page back exactly where she'd found it. When Dad returned, the sweetest smile I'd ever seen instantly reappeared. Honey, she said softly, taking his hand, we should simplify your finances. You deserve less stress. Within weeks, Dad's longtime accountant retired. Our housekeeper of 12 years was suddenly dismissed. Family visits became rare. Every time I called, Evelyn answered. He's resting. Maybe tomorrow. Then one evening, I drove over without warning. Before I reached the front door, I heard Evelyn's voice through the open window. People don't live forever, she whispered. Dad answered too quietly for me to hear. The next night, my phone rang just after midnight. Emily, a nurse said, her voice shaking. Your father collapsed. You need to get here now. I raced to the hospital. But someone was already waiting outside his room. Evelyn? Still smiling. Evelyn stepped in front of my father's hospital room before I could reach the door. I'm so sorry, Emily, she said gently. The doctors don't want him under any stress today. Before I could respond, the nurse who had called me approached us. She frowned at Evelyn. Actually, your father specifically asked to see his daughter. Without another word, she opened the door for me. For the first time, Evelyn's perfect smile cracked. Dad looked exhausted. The machines beside his bed filled the room with a slow, steady rhythm. When I took his hand, he squeezed it surprisingly hard. Listen to me, he whispered. I leaned closer. No matter what happens, trust the people I've always trusted. His eyes shifted toward the door. And don't let anyone rush you into believing what seems obvious. Before I could ask what he meant, Evelyn walked in carrying flowers. There you are, she said warmly. The doctor only wanted family for a few minutes. Dad let go of my hand. He didn't say another word. Looking back, I think he wanted to tell me much more. Over the next month, visiting became almost impossible. One afternoon, I drove to the hospital without calling first. A security guard stopped me at the entrance. I'm sorry, ma'am. Your visitation approval was removed this morning. By who? He glanced at his computer. Your father's wife? That was the moment the pattern became impossible to ignore. Later that week, I met Richard, Dad's longtime financial advisor. He looked frustrated. I was replaced, he said. Your father never told me why. Before leaving, he quietly slipped a sealed envelope into my hand. Your dad asked me to give you this. If anything ever happened to him. I hid it inside my notebook without opening it. 3 weeks later, my phone rang before sunrise. By the time I reached the hospital, it was already over. Dad was gone. At the funeral, Evelyn cried on cue, accepted every hug, and thanked everyone for their support. Most people saw a heartbroken widow. I saw someone performing for an audience. 3 days later, we gathered for the reading of my father's will. The attorney opened the file, then paused. He removed his glasses and looked around the room. "I'll admit," he said quietly, "this wasn't the version of the estate I expected to read." 20 silent minutes later, the reading was over. The mansion, the businesses, the bank accounts, everything my father personally owned, had been left to Evelyn. She turned toward me, waiting for tears. Instead, I calmly closed my notebook. Hidden inside it was the sealed envelope Richard had given me. Evelyn never even noticed it. She was too busy celebrating a victory that wasn't finished yet. 5 days after the reading of my father's will, someone pounded on my front door. I already knew who it was. Evelyn stood outside wearing a cream-colored suit, her lawyer beside her with a leather briefcase. This time there was no fake sympathy. "Where is it?" she demanded. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The money!" she snapped. "My husband's money." Her lawyer stepped forward. "Miss Dawson, if those assets exist, the court will eventually find them. It would be much easier if you cooperated." I looked at both of them for a few seconds. Then I smiled. "Come inside." They followed me into the dining room. I placed my notebook on the table and slowly removed the sealed envelope Richard had given me after my father's death. "I've never opened this," I said. Evelyn rolled her eyes. "So this is your big secret?" I carefully broke the seal. Inside wasn't a fortune. There was only a handwritten letter. My father's handwriting. "Emily, if you're reading this, I wasn't able to fix my biggest mistake. Grandpa planned for this long before I understood why. Call Jonathan Pierce. Tell him I sent you. He'll show you the truth." Below the message was a business card. "Nothing else." Evelyn laughed. "That's it?" I picked up my phone and dialed the number. Less than 30 minutes later, an elderly man walked through my front door carrying a small black lockbox. Jonathan Pierce, the attorney who had worked with my grandfather for over 30 years. He greeted me with a quiet nod before placing the lockbox on the table. "I've been waiting for this day," he said. Evelyn folded her arms. "What is this supposed to prove?" I looked at Jonathan. "My grandfather never trusted putting everything in one place." He smiled. "He wanted to protect your family's future, even from the people closest to it." Jonathan unlocked the case. Inside were several certified documents. I read the first page twice before the words finally sank in. Years before my father met Evelyn, my grandfather had legally transferred his true estate into a private family trust. One beneficiary, one name, mine. I slowly looked up. "My father never owned the fortune you came looking for." Jonathan nodded. "He couldn't leave it to anyone because it was never legally his." No one spoke. Even the old clock on the wall suddenly sounded loud. Evelyn grabbed the papers and desperately flipped through them. "This has to be fake." "It isn't," I replied calmly. "My grandfather saw this coming years ago." Jonathan reached into the lockbox one last time and placed another folder on the table. "There's something else you should read." Evelyn opened it. Her face drained of color. The businesses, the mansion, every asset she had proudly inherited, were carrying millions of dollars in unpaid loans, tax obligations, and corporate liabilities. Her hands began to shake. She looked at her lawyer. This can't be right." He slowly closed the folder. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Mrs. Dawson, you didn't inherit the fortune. You inherited every debt that came with it." The papers slipped from Evelyn's hands. For the first time since she entered our family, she looked genuinely afraid. Evelyn stared at the documents spread across my dining table. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "This isn't over." She looked at her lawyer with desperate eyes. "We'll challenge the trust." He remained silent. "We'll sue her." Still nothing. Finally, he took a slow breath. "Mrs. Dawson, if you challenge this trust, you'll lose." Her voice cracked. "Then I'll appeal." "You can," he replied. "But the trust remains protected. The creditors will begin collecting immediately, and every legal expense will come out of your pocket." He gently pushed another folder toward her. If you continue, you'll lose the case. And you'll still be responsible for every dollar of debt. The room fell silent. For the first time since she entered our family, Evelyn looked afraid. Jonathan Pierce calmly placed one final document in front of her. A voluntary settlement. Sign this and the matter ends today. Her hands trembled as she picked up the pen. For several long seconds, she couldn't move. Then, she signed. Without another word, she stood, picked up her purse, and walked toward the front door. Just before leaving, she looked back at the family photos hanging on the wall. The home she had spent years trying to claim was never really hers. The front door closed behind her. That was the last time I ever saw Evelyn. Jonathan quietly gathered the remaining documents before turning to me. Your grandfather spent years preparing for this day, he said. He always believed wealth could be stolen. But character couldn't. He smiled. Today you proved he chose the right person. A few months later, while helping an elderly widower review suspicious financial paperwork, his relatives had pressured him to sign. I realized how many families were fighting battles just like ours. That afternoon, I established the Dawson Family Foundation, dedicated to protecting seniors from financial manipulation and elder abuse. It wasn't just about preserving my grandfather's legacy anymore. It was about protecting someone else's. Almost a year later, I walked out of the county courthouse after finishing the last legal paperwork connected to my father's estate. As I reached the front steps, another car pulled into the parking lot. Evelyn stepped out. Gone were the designer clothes and expensive jewelry. She carried a single folder marked Bankruptcy Court. For a brief moment, our eyes met. She looked away first. I watched her disappear through the courthouse doors without saying a word. She had spent years chasing a fortune that had never belonged to her. In the end, the only thing she truly inherited was the cost of her own greed. The following Sunday, I stood in my kitchen wearing my father's old blue apron. I poured pancake batter onto the griddle and smiled as the first pancake burned. Just like it always had. Some traditions are worth protecting. Others are worth fighting for. My father used to say that patience always reveals a person's true character. He was right. If you've ever seen greed tear a family apart, tell me in the comments what you would have done in my place. If you believe the truth always wins in the end, subscribe to Revenge Diaries for more unforgettable stories of betrayal, justice, and karma.